the 14th of February, 1929, 10:38 a.m., Chicago. You are standing inside the SMC Cartage Company garage at 2122 North Clark Street. The walls are brick. The floor slopes toward a drain installed for washing trucks. That drain is full. The air smells like four things at once. Cordite, hot and sour, from 70 spent. 45 caliber rounds. Copper, from roughly 8 liters of pooled blood thickening in the February cold. Motor oil and urine because 7 men just died with their bladders full and their hands against that wall. A German shepherd named Highball is tied to a truck axle screaming, "That is the room where the modern American mafia was born." Not in a smoky speakeasy, not in a boardroom, in a service garage that smelled like a slaughterhouse, because that is exactly what it was. You have been lied to about this story for almost a century. You were sold fedoras. You were sold boardwalk empire. You were sold a man named Al Capone, who lived large, fed the poor, and ruled a city with charm. Hollywood gave him a Robert De Niro. HBO gave him a soundtrack. Tour buses in Chicago still sell his face on coffee mugs. The truth has none of that production value. Between 1,920 and 1,933, more than 500 gangland murders occurred in Chicago. Almost none were solved. Most were not investigated. The bodies were filed alongside lost dogs and unpaid parking tickets because the police were on the payroll, the mayor was on the payroll, the judges were on the payroll, and the city morgue could not keep up. This is not a story about a charming outlaw. This is a forensic case file on an industrial killing operation. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born in Brooklyn on the 17th of January, 1899, son of a Neapolitan barber, dropped out of school at 14 for punching a female teacher in the face. He was, by every available metric, a stupid and violent child who grew into a stupid and violent adult with a gift for spreadsheets. You have heard the name Scarface. You have not heard how he earned it. There was no duel. No heroic blade in a back alley. In 1917, working the door at the Hawthorne Inn in Coney Island, Capone leaned over a customer's sister and said, "Honey, you have a nice ass, and I mean that as a compliment." Her brother, a small-time hood named Frank Galluccio, opened his face with a pocket knife. 3 slashes. Capone bled into the sawdust. That is the legend. A man scarred for being a creep at the door of a dive bar. By the time he reached Chicago, Capone was running a business that grossed roughly $100 million a year in 1920s currency, $1.7 billion in today's money. Adjusted for inflation, the outfit had better profit margins than Apple. The Roaring '20s did not roar. They gurgled. What follows is structured in 5 layers, and each is worse than the last. The machine that built the empire, the methods used to enforce it, the massacre that defined it, the poison the United States Treasury pumped into your great-grandparents' liquor on purpose, and finally the syphilis spirochete that ate Al Capone's brain from the inside while he played one banjo note in a Florida bedroom for hours. Thesis: Al Capone was not an icon. He was a CEO of mass-produced death, propped up by a city he owned, a federal government that fed him, and a public that wanted the costume more than the corpse count. Everything you were taught about him is a lie sold for ticket sales. If you came for the romance, close this tab. If you came for the cold facts, the body counts, and the names scrubbed from every public school textbook in this country, then subscribe to the dark ledge. We do not glamorize, we document. Before you can understand how 7 men ended up against that wall, you have to understand the spreadsheet. Because Al Capone did not start in blood. He started in arithmetic. Arithmetic begins in Brooklyn, not in Chicago, not with Capone. With a quiet, polite, almost boring man named Johnny Torrio. You will not see him on a coffee mug. You will not find him, played by De Niro, Torrio dressed like a bank teller, did not drink, did not smoke, did not chase women, and personally killed almost no one. He treated organized crime like a Harvard Business School case study, except his case studies ended in funerals. He was the man who invented the modern American mafia, and Al Capone was his hire. In 1919, Torrio brought Capone to Chicago not to be a gunman, but to manage brothels in the Levee district on the South Side. Capone was 20 years old. His job title, if such a thing had existed, would have read assistant operations manager, prostitution, salary plus bonus. Then the federal government handed Johnny Torrio a billion-dollar business as a wedding gift. On the 17th of January 1920, the Volstead Act took effect. It made the manufacture, sale, and transport of alcohol illegal across the United States. It was Capone's 21st birthday. America had just outlawed its own most profitable consumer product on the exact day the man who would monopolize that product became old enough to drink it legally if it were legal, which it suddenly was not. You could not write this in fiction. The editors would say it was too neat. The economics were obscene. A barrel of beer cost roughly $4 to brew and sold to a speakeasy operator for $55. A case of bonded Canadian whiskey cost $10 at the Detroit border and sold in a Loop hotel for $90. Margins higher than cocaine in the 1980s, higher than fentanyl today, higher than any legal American industry on record except slavery. Demand did not drop when alcohol became illegal. Demand detonated. The 13 years of Prohibition were the 13 drunkest years in American history. The federal government created a market and outsourced enforcement to whoever was willing to murder for it. Torrio and Capone were willing. Their first headquarters was the Four Deuces at 2222 South Wabash Avenue, a 4-story building vertically integrated like a department store. Brothel on the top floor, gambling on the second, speakeasy on the first, torture and execution in the basement. The Four Deuces was not a metaphor. There was a soundproofed room with a drain in it. Bodies left through a service door that opened on an alley with no street light. This is where the soup kitchen myth dies. You have seen the photograph. Al Capone behind a counter ladling broth to grateful men in the Depression. He fed thousands, the caption says. He was a friend to the poor. He opened that soup kitchen in November 1930, 21 months after the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Public relations, damage control, the soup was free. The newspaper photograph was the product. He paid for the ingredients out of 1 week's bootleg revenue. The kitchen closed quietly within a year. The poor were never the constituency. The headlines were. By 1920, 42 distinct gangs had carved up Chicago like butchers dividing a hog. The North Side belonged to Dean O'Banion, a former altar boy turned florist who killed 25 men personally and sent fresh roses to their widows the next morning. The West Side belonged to the terrible Jennis, 6 Sicilian brothers who paid neighborhood families $15 a day to cook moonshine in their kitchens. Children stirred the mash. Grandmothers tended the stills. An entire ethnic enclave became an industrial distillery powered by domestic labor and the threat of execution. The South Side belonged to Torrio and Capone. The first murder, you should remember, is Big Jim Colosimo, the 11th of May, 1920. Shot once behind the ear in the lobby of his own restaurant at 2126 South Wabash. The killer was almost certainly Frankie Yale, imported from Brooklyn for the day at Torrio's request. Colosimo's crime was not betrayal. Colosimo had refused to enter bootlegging. He had a profitable brothel empire and did not want the federal heat. Refusing profit in this organization was a capital offense. They killed him at lunch hour in his own dining room 3 weeks after he returned from his honeymoon, the dry version. Big Jim retired earlier than expected. Now inventory the corruption. Mayor William Hale Thompson, known as Big Bill, took outfit cash openly and bragged about it on the stump. Chief of Detectives Michael Hughes was on the payroll. 3 sitting state senators were on the payroll. Roughly 60% of the Chicago police force collected envelopes monthly, paid in marked denominations to track loyalty. The Cook County coroner accepted bribes to misfile cause of death. Speakeasies operated within sight of police stations because the police station was the speakeasy's largest customer. In April 1924, the outfit functionally annexed the suburb of Cicero, Illinois. They installed their own mayor, Joseph Clenna. On primary day, April 1, Capone's men beat voters with blackjacks, kidnapped poll workers, and shot dead the Democratic campaign manager in the street. Clenna won. Capone moved his operational headquarters into the Hawthorne Hotel and ran a small American town as a private fiefdom for the next 4 years. During that same election, Chicago police, in a rare moment of intervention, opened fire on a Cicero polling station. Frank Capone, Al's older brother, took multiple rounds in the chest while drawing a revolver. He was 29. His funeral cost $20,000 in 1924 currency. 12,000 of that was orchids alone, 600 cars in the procession. A police escort provided by the same department that had killed him 3 days earlier. Chicago did not have ethics. Chicago had a ledger. Then came the gun that changed everything. The Thompson submachine gun was designed in 1918 for World War I trench clearing. The war ended before a single one fired in combat. The U.S. Army, stuck with surplus, sold them through hardware stores, sporting goods catalogs, and the Sears Roebuck mail-order business. $200 per unit, no license, no background check. You filled out a card, paid cash, and the United States Postal Service delivered a fully automatic weapon to your front door. The outfit bought them by the crate. A Thompson fires 45 ACP rounds at 600 to 800 rounds per minute. Effective range 50 yards. Cyclic rate so high that a 20-round magazine empties in under 2 seconds. The 45 ACP round is designed to transfer maximum kinetic energy to soft tissue. It does not pass through a human body. It opens the human body. You did not get shot by a Tommy gun in 1920 Chicago. You were disassembled by one in public, often during business hours. In Capone, Chicago, the Second Amendment was less a constitutional right than a small business expense. By the spring of 1925, Johnny Torrio had survived 4 bullets to his chest, jaw, and groin in the driveway of his own home. He took the warning. He handed Capone the keys to the entire South Side operation, packed his savings, and retired quietly to Italy. He died decades later of a heart attack in a barber's chair in Brooklyn. He was the only senior outfit boss in American history to die naturally in retirement with his money intact. At 26 years old, you, Al Capone, now own the city. You have the police. You have the politicians. You have the press. You have the guns. You have a brother in the ground and a personal income larger than the gross domestic product of several recognized nations. And you have one problem. His name is Dean O'Banion. He sells flowers on State Street, and he has been laughing at you for 2 years. Pause for a moment. You just learned that the United States federal government created Al Capone by accident, armed him through the Sears catalog, and then watched him buy an entire American city for cash on the open market. So here is the question. If a billion-dollar criminal empire could be assembled in 1920 with nothing more than a prohibition law, a postal order form, and a willingness to bribe cops, what would the same recipe build today? Tell us in the comments. Be specific. Name the industry. Name the law. And smash that like button to feed the algorithm with real history. Because the algorithm prefers fairy tales, and we do not deal in fairy tales on this channel. The flower shop is next. The flower shop is next. You walk into Schofield's at 738 North State Street across the boulevard from Holy Name Cathedral on the morning of the 10th of November, 1924. The shop smells like a funeral because it is preparing one. Mike Merlo, head of the Unione Siciliana, died of cancer 2 days ago. Every wreath in Chicago is being assembled here. The room is wet with cut stems. The water on the floor is 2 centimeters deep. Dean O'Banion stands at a workbench arranging chrysanthemums. He is 32 years old, a former altar boy from Holy Name across the street. He is the most hated man on Capone's payroll, except he is not on Capone's payroll, which is precisely the problem. The bell over the door rings. 3 men enter. Frankie Yale, imported from Brooklyn for the day, leads. John Scalise and Albert Anselmi flank him. O'Banion smiles. He extends his right hand to Yale in greeting. Yale grips it hard and does not let go. Scalise and Anselmi step forward and empty their revolvers. 6 rounds, 2 in the chest, 2 in the throat, 2 in the back of the skull as he falls. O'Banion crumples into the lilies he had been arranging for another man's funeral. The chrysanthemums absorb most of the blood. The wreaths shipped on schedule. You were taught that the mafia operates by a code. Honor, respect. The handshake is sacred contract. In Sicilian tradition, extending your hand was a guarantee of safety. You did not kill a man whose palm was in yours. The outfit identified that custom. They studied it, and they used it as bait. This is the most important thing you will learn today. The mafia did not break its own rules. The mafia recognized which rules other people followed and weaponized them. Every time you see the handshake of death in a Scorsese film, in The Godfather, in any HBO production, you are watching a real technique adapted from a real flower shop on a real Monday morning in 1924. They did not invent ritual. They invented betrayal at the speed of ritual. O'Banion's funeral cost $100,000. 26 trucks of flowers, a solid silver casket worth $10,000 alone. Capone, Torrio, and the entire North Side gang attended. They tipped their hats to the corpse and went home to plan how to kill the next man in line. That man was Jaime Weiss. For 2 years, Weiss tried to murder Capone. He came close. On the 20th of September, 1926, 11 black sedans pulled up outside the Hawthorne Hotel in Cicero, where Capone was eating lunch at a corner table. 8 gunmen disembarked. They poured 1,000 rounds of Thompson submachine gun fire into the dining room over the course of 3 minutes. Diners dropped to the floor among their soup bowls. Capone survived because his bodyguard, Frankie Rio, threw himself across his body. A bystander named Louis Barco took a bullet through the shoulder. A woman seated near the window lost the sight in her left eye to flying glass. Her name barely made the next day's papers. She was not paid. She was not interviewed. She was an actuarial line item in a feud she did not know existed. 3 weeks later, the 11th of October, 1926, Jaime Weiss was walking up State Street toward Schofield's, the same flower shop where he had buried O'Banion. He was returning from a courthouse hearing. A Thompson opened up from a second-story window across the street. 10 rounds entered him before he hit the pavement. The cornerstone of Holy Name Cathedral, 20 feet behind him, took several stray bullets. The inscription on that stone reads, in carved Latin and English, "Every knee should bow at the name of Jesus." Pilgrims photographed the bullet pox for decades. The diocese eventually restored the stone. The bullets are gone. The reputation remains. The methods, by 1927, had been standardized into a procedural manual no one wrote down. The one-way ride, coined by Jaime Weiss himself before his death, was the most common. Target picked up under friendly pretense, often by a man he had eaten dinner with the week before, driven to a remote stretch of road in Indiana or to a quarry south of the city, shot in the back of the head while still in the passenger seat, body dumped, or left in the vehicle for someone else to find. The dry cleaners who handled outfit suits offered same-day service. Cement shoes, contrary to every film you have seen, were almost certainly never used in Capone-era Chicago. Pure Hollywood invention. Cement is slow to mix, traceable to suppliers, and far too heavy to handle quickly. The reality was simpler. Bodies were weighted with scrap chain or pig iron, and dumped from the Indiana Harbor breakwater into Lake Michigan, or from a quiet bridge into the Chicago River. The Calumet River accepted hundreds of John Does between 1923 and 1933. The city stopped attempting identification around 1927. The trunk job involved folding a corpse into the trunk of a stolen Cadillac and parking the car in rival territory as a message. Midsummer trunk jobs were particularly memorable for the neighborhood that found them. For internal discipline, the outfit preferred the Italian rope trick. A length of piano wire looped around the throat from behind. Quiet, reusable, no ballistic evidence, no screaming. The victim soiled himself within 40 seconds. These were not crimes of passion. These were workplace protocols. Then came the spring of 1928 and the pineapple primary. Pineapple was outfit slang for a hand grenade. In the months leading up to the April 10 Republican primary, 62 confirmed bombings rocked Chicago, polling places, candidate homes, newspaper offices. The home of Senator Charles Deneen was bombed. The home of Judge John Swanson was bombed. The outfit was protecting Big Bill Thompson's political machine and physically removing every reformist candidate from the ballot, one explosion at a time. The most documented murder of that campaign was Octavius Granati, a black lawyer and political organizer running against the outfit slate in the 20th Ward. On the evening of April 10, 4 men in a touring car chased Granati through the streets of the West Side for 16 blocks. They cornered him at the intersection of Walnut and Hoyne. 3 of them stepped out and emptied their weapons into his vehicle. Granati died slumped over his steering wheel, 2 blocks from the polling station he had been monitoring as a citizen observer. 4 outfit men, including 2 off-duty Chicago police officers, were indicted. All 4 were acquitted. The witnesses recanted. Some moved out of state. 1 simply disappeared. The American press called it a tragedy. The outfit called it Tuesday. The most disturbing event in this catalog took place on the 7th of May, 1929, less than 3 months after the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Capone hosted a banquet at the Hawthorne Inn for John Scalise, Albert Anselmi, and Joseph Hoptoad Giunta. The same Scalise and Anselmi who had emptied their revolvers into Dino Banyan in the flower shop 5 years earlier. Loyal hitmen, veterans of the empire. Capone believed they were plotting against him. After the meal, his men tied the 3 guests to their chairs. According to the most widely reported version, Capone retrieved a baseball bat from a side room. He worked methodically. He struck the soles of their feet first, then the shins, then the knees. He moved upward across an hour, breaking bones in sequence to keep them conscious. The screaming stopped being words around the 8th minute. He shot each man in the head at the end, for clean accounting. Some modern historians, notably Jonathan Eeg and Lawrence Bergreen, have questioned whether the dinner table sequence happened exactly as the contemporary papers reported. The bodies were certainly found dumped on a country road outside Hammond, Indiana. The coroner certainly documented near total skeletal destruction below the clavicle on all 3 men. Whether Capone personally swung the bat or merely scheduled the appointment is a footnote. The autopsies are not a footnote. The dry version, it was not a falling out, it was a performance review. By February 1929, Al Capone has murdered his rivals, his suspected disloyal subordinates, his loyal subordinates he merely suspected of disloyalty, and an unknown number of women, children, and lawyers who happened to be standing in the wrong room at the wrong time. But there is one man he cannot reach. George Bugs Moran still runs the North Side. Moran has called Capone the Beast in print. Moran has tried to kill him 3 separate times. Capone is now going to do something so loud, so public, and so theatrical that the President of the United States will read about it over breakfast in the White House and decide to personally destroy him. 7 men, 1 garage, 1 dog tied to a truck axle, You are about to walk back into that room. You walk back into that room, but first you fly south. January 1929. Al Capone purchases a 14-room estate at 93 Palm Avenue on Palm Island, Miami, for $40,000 cash. He is 30 years old. He has not yet been federally indicted for anything. He has, however, started building an alibi for the act he is about to commission. He arranges a meeting with the Dade County prosecutor for the morning of the 14th of February, 1929 at 11:00 a.m. local time, specifically to be photographed in Florida discussing the local liquor situation. Thoroughly photographed, notarized, witnessed, 1,000 miles north in a service garage on the wrong side of Lincoln Park. His men are preparing. The bait was simple. A hijacked truck of old log cabin Canadian whiskey, premium grade, offered to Bugs Moran's North Side operation at a steep discount. The drop scheduled for 10:30 a.m. On Valentine's morning, at the SMC Cartage Company at 2122 North Clark Street, Moran took the bait. He always did. He was greedy, brave, and not particularly intelligent, which made him useful as a corpse on a calendar. The shooters were never officially confirmed by Cook County. Forensic ballistics, performed later by Calvin Goddard, identified at least 2 specific Thompson submachine guns. The probable participants, based on subsequent investigation, defections, and Goddard's matching of weapons recovered from Fred Burke's home a year later, were Jack Machine Gun McGurn as coordinator, Fred Killer Burke as primary shooter, John Scalise and Albert Anselmi as secondary shooters, and 2 men disguised in Chicago police uniforms standing in the front room to herd the victims into position. The uniformed men were not real police, but the men inside the garage did not know that. That was the entire point. 10:30 a.m. 7 men are inside. 6 belong to Moran. Pete Goosenberg, Frank Goosenberg, James Clark, Adam Heyer, Albert Weinshank, John May, a mechanic earning $50 a week. The 7th man, Reinhard Schwimmer, is a 30-year-old optometrist with no criminal record. He came that morning because hanging around gangsters thrilled him. He liked watching tough guys talk shop. He told his mother he was going to look at automobiles. 10:35 a.m. The fake police car parks at the curb. 2 men in uniform enter the front. 4 others follow in plain clothes. The 7 men inside, assuming this is a routine police shakedown, set down their cigarettes, raise their hands, and turn to face the wall. Compliance is the standard play. You let the cops paw through your pockets, you slip them an envelope, you go back to work. This had happened 100 times before. This time the rules were different. 10:38 a.m. The Thompsons opened up. 70 rounds of .45 ACP in roughly 20 seconds. The walls disintegrate, the men do not fall cleanly. They are torn open from behind, ribs splintering outward, lungs vented, spines disconnecting from skulls. James Clark falls atop Frank Goosenberg, partially shielding him. Adam Heyer crumples sideways across a workbench. Albert Weinshank, who is wearing the same camel overcoat as Moran and resembles him in build, takes most of the concentrated fire to the head, which is the reason this hit was scheduled today. 2 shotgun blasts follow. Confirmation. The shooters walk out the rear door, hands raised by the men in police uniforms, as though they have just made an arrest. The fake police car pulls away at normal traffic speed. A German shepherd named Highball, tied to the axle of a delivery truck, begins to scream. He does not stop for 47 minutes. That is what brings the actual police, not the gunfire. Gunfire in 1929 Chicago was indistinguishable from a backfiring Buick. A neighbor across the alley investigates the screaming dog and finds the back door ajar. He looks in. He vomits in the alley. Then he runs. The crime scene smells like 4 things: cordite, copper, motor oil, urine. The men had voided their bladders on death. 8 liters of blood pool toward a floor drain installed for the cleaning of trucks. The drain is not large enough. The blood backs up across the concrete. February cold preserves everything in the exact position of fall. Photographs taken at 12:30 p.m. show the men still warm enough to be steaming faintly in the air. Frank Gusenberg, against all medical probability, is still alive. 14 bullet wounds, conscious. Rushed to Alexian Brothers Hospital across the city. Sergeant Clarence Sweeney sits at his bedside for 3 hours. He asks repeatedly, "Who shot you, Frank?" Gusenberg, drifting in and out, bleeding internally from at least 9 punctures, looks up at the sergeant and says clearly, "Nobody shot me." He repeats it twice more before he dies at 1:30 p.m. The code held, even through morphine, even through the certainty of death. The outfit had trained its men to die wordless, and they did. Bugs Moran, by accident, survived. He had been running late that morning. He saw the parked black sedan at the curb from a block away, assumed it was police, turned around, and walked into a coffee shop. He famously said later, in a phrase that should be carved on his headstone, "Only Capone kills like that." Capone in Florida gave reporters a smile and replied, "The only man who kills like that is Bugs Moran." Both quotes are likely true. Both men were correct. Then Calvin Goddard arrived. Goddard was a private ballistics expert, hired by a coalition of horrified Chicago businessmen who had finally lost patience with the bodies on their sidewalks. He pioneered the comparison microscope. He matched the spent 45 casings from the garage to 2 specific Thompson submachine guns. A year later, when Fred Burke was arrested in Street, Joseph, Michigan, for the unrelated murder of a police officer, investigators searched his home and found those 2 Thompsons in the basement. Goddard test-fired them. The match was conclusive. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre is the first major murder case in American history solved by ballistic fingerprinting. Forensic science, as you understand it today, was born inside a service garage on North Clark Street. The myth says the massacre made Capone powerful. The myth is wrong. Herbert Hoover took the oath of office 3 weeks later, on March 4, and within days was personally directing Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon to find any charge, any statute, any procedural lever that would put Capone in a federal prison. The Internal Revenue Service assigned its best agent, Frank J. Wilson, to Capone's books full-time. Within 2 years, Capone was indicted for tax evasion. The massacre was not a coronation. It was a suicide note delivered by Thompson's submachine gun. Now lift your eyes from the garage floor for one moment, because there is a second horror running in parallel that no high school history textbook in this country will mention. While the outfit murdered each other in alleys, the United States Treasury was murdering the general public on an industrial scale. Beginning in 1926, in a program quietly strengthened at the federal level, the Treasury Department ordered industrial alcohol denatured with methanol, benzene, kerosene, gasoline, and mercury salts. The stated goal was to discourage bootleggers from rebottling industrial alcohol as drinking liquor. Outfit chemists redistilled what they could. They never fully removed the methanol. They sold the resulting product through their speakeasies anyway, knowingly at a markup. Conservative federal estimates placed the dead at 10,000 American citizens between 1,926 and 1,933. Blindness, paralysis, organ failure, asphyxiation. New York City alone reported over 1,200 poisoning deaths in 1928. Doctors filed reports. Editorials raged. Senator Edward Edwards of New Jersey called it legalized murder on the Senate floor. The program continued. No Treasury official was prosecuted. No outfit chemist was prosecuted. The customers, the federal government argued, were responsible for drinking what was clearly marked poisonous. The customers were also dead, which made testimony difficult. You walk into a Cicero speakeasy in March 1928. You order a glass of bathtub gin for 40 cents. Within an hour, your peripheral vision narrows. Within 4 hours, you cannot feel your hands. By morning, your liver is hemorrhaging. The bartender shrugs. The next customer is already ordering. It remains the only public health initiative in American history specifically engineered to kill the constituents it was meant to protect. It worked. Capone walks out of his Florida estate on the afternoon of the 14th of February, 1929, believing he has won the war. He has 6 years left as a functioning human being. Quick check-in. If you have made it this far, click that like button right now, 15 seconds of your thumb. We are about to enter the darkest part of this entire story. Not the bullets, not the bodies on the garage floor. What comes next is what happens to a man's brain when a microscopic organism he caught at 19 finally finishes eating its way through his cortex while he sits drooling on a banjo in a Florida bedroom. The bullets were the easy part. Stay with us. The banjo plays the same note for hours. It is 1938. Alcatraz, cell block B, federal prisoner 85, is trying to remember the chord he knew yesterday. He is 39 years old. His name is Alphonse Gabriel Capone. The autopsy will later confirm that his brain weighs less than that of a healthy 12-year-old. The killer is not the Bureau of Prisons. The killer is a corkscrew-shaped bacterium called Treponema pallidum, the spirochete that causes syphilis, contracted in 1917 at the Hawthorne Inn during the same shift that gave him the scar on his cheek. 2 souvenirs from one bad night, both inoperable. By 1939, he is released into the custody of his family, paroled by biology. He plays banjo for visitors. He converses with imaginary friends named Sonny. He cannot remember Bugs Moran. He cannot remember the flower shop, the garage, the bat, the bodies. He cannot remember being Capone. The Empire does not miss him. Frank Nitti inherits the chair. Paul Ricca succeeds Nitti. Tony Accardo succeeds Ricca. The outfit grows quieter, larger, and more profitable than Capone ever managed. They abandon the Thompsons. They become invisible, and they stay invisible. The American Mafia of Las Vegas, of the Teamsters of the Kennedy era, is the same organization Capone briefly fronted, run by men who learned exactly one lesson from his arrest: do not be famous. On the 25th of January 1947, in his Palm Island bedroom, Capone suffers a stroke. He develops pneumonia. He dies 4 days later, incontinent, weeping, and confused at the age of 48. The Thompson submachine gun did not get him. The federal government did not get him. A spiral sheet the width of a comma got him. This is the true cost of the Wild West that America keeps trying to sell you. Not gunslingers on dusty streets. Not glamorous outlaws on horseback. Just a brain dissolving in a Florida bedroom while the organization keeps shipping, the city keeps voting, and the customers keep dying of methanol in their drinks. The frontier was never lawless. It was just franchised. There is no honor. There is no code. There is no romance. There is only profit, biology, and the slow erasure of memory. Today, 2122 North Clark Street is a fenced patch of grass beside a senior living facility. The garage was demolished in 1967. The bricks were auctioned individually to collectors at $1,500 each. The Palm Island mansion now lists on luxury rental sites for several thousand a night. Sleeps 14, breakfast included. The Thompson submachine guns from the massacre sit behind plexiglass in the Berrien County Sheriff Department Museum. You can buy a Capone walking tour for $35 and finish at a souvenir shop selling fedoras. The bullets were sold, the bricks were sold, the house was sold, the name was sold, the Hollywood adaptation was sold, and resold and sold again. But the smell, the cordite, the urine, the motor oil, the copper, that one was never for sale. That one stayed in the room. If you survived this video, comment the single word "survived" below. Tell us you made it to the end. Then subscribe to The Dark Ledge for the next case file we open. There is always one more room.